Good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I'd like to call the February 2nd, 2022 meeting of the Affordable Housing Plan Advisory Committee to order. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Would you do the roll call, please?
Ms. Balco? Mr. Capola?
Here.
Amy Balco's here.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Here.
Ms. Gamlin?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Shipman?
Here.
Ms. Sisti?
Here.
Okay. If I could just, what I'd like to do is just for a minute, skip past the item 3, community outreach session with focus on town departments and staff. We're waiting for Jennifer to show up. If we could just move to the review and action on minutes from the January 26th, 2022 special meeting. It's fairly lengthy. I don't know how many of you had a chance to read it, so if we could just take a couple minutes to skim through that, please. I hope so. I don't know. Oh, could be. Okay. I don't know either. Maybe. Yeah, it was kind of funny.
Jen's coming on. She's coming on.
She's on. People need more time or on any corrections, comments?
There was one correction I had that Rashida Forrester's last name was listed as Miss Williams, just needs to be corrected to Miss Forrester. That's on from the 6:45 to 6:55 time slot.
Right. I had one on page 5. Ms. Capola, who's on the end over here, is actually Mr. Capola. On page 5. Is there anything else anybody's got? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second,
I second.
any discussion?
Excellent job on the minutes.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so moved, the minutes are approved. Okay, if we could go back to item number 3, the community outreach session, focus on town department. Jennifer, you're with us? Do you want to say anything before we start, or?
I am here. So we do have 3 speakers for tonight. I see that our first speaker is on. It's Doug Truitt. And so happy to have you here, Doug. And why don't you go ahead? I did speak to Doug earlier today. He has some great information to share with you.
Okay, so Doug, I'll turn it over to you then.
I didn't catch that.
I'll turn it over to you if that's okay.
Okay. Yep, that's fine. So yeah, I'm the Director of Social and Youth Services for the town. I started about 32 years ago. So I came in with, 8-30G when that all started as well. And, there were a lot of good discussions going on at the time with, planning and other folks. So I remember that well. Most of my interaction with housing issues is, working with our, client base, town residents. And they're generally people who are in crisis or situations that could be moving quite quickly towards crisis. There are some exceptions to that, but one of our responsibilities is working with people who are facing eviction. I try to help prevent evictions, help give people guidance as to what the process is going to be like and what their expectations can be, and ideas of, ways to get through it, to get alternate housing and things like that. With the Uniform Relocation Act, we're the lead agency if that gets implemented, say for code enforcement or something. It applies to people who are long-term displaced from housing, and it's a mandate in both state and federal law. And we have an obligation to help with finding them alternative housing placements. In that case, it doesn't apply to short-term displacements, but that's more frequently what we encounter in those situations. And we do the best we can with what little resources we have to try to help people through the short-term displacements as well. We work with homeless people, and with them, the options are very limited. The state has a centralized, coordinated access network system that they've set up, and we help people connect with that. Help them to look through all of their options, who they know, who they're connected with, what possible assistance they might get, what benefits they might be eligible for. Are they a veteran or not? Because there's extra benefits available to veterans, but just on a case-by-case basis, work through those. Something that we run into quite frequently, which is going to be more relevant to this group, is people who are in affordable housing. And so they in Berlin, most of that is age restricted, though Fieldstone and River's Edge aren't. But they go into affordable housing able to afford it, but not with a wide margin. And the rents and affordables go up, in proportion to the median income, and their income generally doesn't. A lot of times they're on fixed incomes. And so we find that people who maybe got into an affordable housing situation 5-6 years ago are finding themselves priced out of it. And just they need to move. They won't be able to sustain in those situations, and that can be a pretty big shock to them. When possible, we help them to try and look at subsidized housing options. The wait lists are long, but if they have the ability to stick it out for a couple years where they are, we might not find it in Berlin, but somewhere within the region, we can help them, get on wait lists and ultimately get offered a subsidized. A lot of people don't want that option and will, turn it down and, just, do the best they can. And sometimes they'll end up being evicted and, in a crisis situation. We encounter people fairly often who they've been living in market housing, they can afford it. They might be living near their means, but their life circumstances change. It can be for any number of reasons. It can be, a medical crisis. It can be, change of job, loss of job, business failure, divorce, whatever, but it's knocked them out of being able to afford the housing that they're in. And, it's hard to find. It's very, very hard to find rental housing for people in that situation in Berlin that they can afford. They may not, qualify for age restricted. Their credit might be, damaged by the crisis that they're facing. There's just a lot of circumstances that make it hard, and the rents are really expensive in Berlin, and recently have gotten much more so as well. So there's few available. Market rents are often not even advertised in Berlin, and people find them by word of mouth and signs and people put up in front of their property or that kind of thing. So it's very difficult to find, and a lot of those people end up having to relocate to other communities where there's more housing available. And that's especially difficult for the ones who maybe are, lifelong Berlin residents, and the ones that have children in the school system who have been doing very well. And, especially if they're getting special ed services or anything like that. And it can be quite a trauma for them to move out. So those are some of the hardest types of cases to work with. I don't know if people have any, questions or want to interact on any of the things that I've shared about that.
Doug, I'm George Miller. Could you maybe help try to quantify a little bit, like how many people, I know not exactly, but in a given year that are faced with these types of problems?
We've been for many years a two-person office for all social and youth services in the town, and just this current year we've managed to expand to a 2.5-person office. So like full-on statistical tracking of situations is just something that we don't have the time to do. So this is just sort of my guesstimates and whatnot from experiences. And COVID has impacted things, not always for the bad either, but with COVID, evictions have gone way down because of both the federal moratorium that was in place, the state moratorium that was in place, and then the requirement that landlords cooperate with Unite CT before an eviction could proceed in court, but that expires February 15th. So if that's not extended, there could be a wave of evictions that will start moving our way very, very soon. In pre-COVID years, we might get anywhere from 8 to 20 evictions in a year. We really try to head those off and help people to figure out how they can fix their situation, how they can relocate without having to go through the whole eviction process. Things like that. It depends on why they're getting evicted. So it's not that many where it actually gets to an execution of the eviction, but probably up close to 20 that we get served with and intervene in. People getting priced out of the deed restricted affordables. It's several a year. I've got a couple of them right now that we're engaged with, and typically, any month we're working on, one or more cases where people are reluctant to face that they can't sustain where they are. And we help them to try to understand that there are options. They might not be their ideal options, but they're better than ending up going through an eviction and really ending up in a crisis. Homeless, spring and summer and fall, there's a decent number of people between out behind the railroad tracks and down near the Cromwell line, camping out. Some go to more remote areas and wooded areas and whatnot, and they do pretty well with that. They've adopted a lifestyle, and we might just provide some intermittent supports with food, or if somebody needed a tarp or something, I can figure out a way to get them that. The ones that are willing to engage with the coordinated access network and get perhaps rapid rehousing or some other state services, they get frustrated by it because there's not enough services available. There aren't enough shelter beds available. Someone can be absolutely homeless and on the street and still wait 2 to 4 weeks to get a shelter bed. So those are frustrating situations that we can't offer solutions that really feel satisfying to them or to us. In the wintertime, a lot of those people just kind of disappear. Some of them go into the state's no freeze shelter system, where it is easier to get a shelter bed midwinter. Some of them find ways to couch surf. Some of them go south and then come back in the warm weather, things like that. So like right now, I'm only aware of a couple of homeless people in the community, and then those numbers will start to go up again in the spring. Any other questions on the how we interface with folks?
Doug, you made a comment, this is Jennifer, you made a comment that some folks who are facing eviction, that they don't necessarily welcome going the subsidy route. What's your sense of why that is?
Some of them, it's hard to even face the reality that the eviction's going to happen. A lot of times it's someone who's elderly and or disabled, and they can't grasp the concept that in our country it's possible that they can actually be put out on the street. And I try to gently but firmly convince them that this is real, and they wait until the last minute, and at that point shelter services or them trying to get favors from friends, relatives are the answers that work the best. We can help them maybe store their belongings for a short time while they're trying to find some place to go. But there's a lot of people who just won't face that they could get evicted, and it's really hard when that day comes and the marshal's out there with the movers. And I've seen people who've really gone into significant panics and meltdowns, and have needed either medical or police interventions when that's happened.
Doug, with your historical background, do you have a sense in your mind what the most pressing type of need for affordable housing is? i.e., like at what levels, like 50% AMI, 60, 80, things like that? Apartment rentals, mostly 1-2 person families, or is there a need for multi, 3-4 people?
There's pressing needs on a couple of different fronts. One is subsidized, low income subsidized housing for people who are on SSI, for people who have very low Social Security and that's their only income. They can't afford affordables. They heard that, Sage Pond or Stonebridge or something is affordable, and then when you show them what the rent is, it's they can't understand how anyone even calls that affordable in those situations. And then the wait lists, I mean, it's true in Berlin, it's true in almost every community that the wait lists open up, maybe, once a year. And then for a very brief time, and then there's like a lottery to assign people to the wait lists, and then it can be multiple years before they're offered an apartment. We do help people strategize with that, and the ones who work with us, I can, sometimes find something in less than a year. That way, because what we'll do is I can't do the work for them because it's just, Jamie and me, but we will, give them the information, the best that we can find on how to track the wait lists on subsidized housing, and strongly encourage them that every list that opens, apply for it, get your names on it. Some of them are just their simple pre-application. Some require the full application, which can be overwhelming to a lot of the populations that we work with. But, we try to help them, go through that process and get on all the wait lists that they can, because everyone is independent, and whichever one happened to move the fastest, they'll get offered an apartment. And like I say, I mean, I've seen some where it's been, maybe 6 months to a year where they've actually successfully found a place, but more typically it can take years to get one. There just simply isn't enough subsidized. There aren't enough housing choice vouchers available. Berlin's part of the statewide pool that rarely opens their wait list, and it's a long wait list. Now that's been ameliorated a little bit with the stimulus packages for COVID. That's one of the areas that actually has gotten a little bit better because of COVID and the money that's been poured into housing, where typically I knew people who had been on the list for 7, 8, 9 years, and still not hearing back. And just recently, I heard of a person that we've worked with intermittently who was on the list for only like 3 to 4 years and got their housing voucher. So that's a huge improvement. It's not good. It's not anywhere near where it needs to be, but there just isn't enough of that kind of housing. And that one wasn't elderly or disabled. Project-based age-restricted housing, wasn't an option for them. And so that's where another, thing comes in, is the non-age restricted housing. Berlin's gotten better about it with the recent developments that are at least in the pipeline, and especially the metro development that's going to be going in was what 80 some units, I believe, and not age restricted. And that is wonderful. That is desperately needed. It's not going to meet all the need, but it at least is going to give a lot of people some options there. Where there's really nothing filling the gap is more family-oriented housing. You've got families of 4, 5, 6 people trying to make it work in the 2 bedrooms that Metro has that aren't age restricted, but it's not adequate housing for them, but it's the best that they can do, because market rate, a 3-bedroom apartment in Berlin, you're lucky if you see it for, not much over 2,000. And these people aren't going to be able to afford that. And even like an 80% deed restricted 3-bedroom is going to be in that ballpark. It needs to be more, at least at the 60% of median income range, to start getting into the range of affordable. So, I mean, I think Metro Realty has done some wonderful stuff for this community, and working with, the planning and all the people who work with them to do what they've done. I think it's great. And if we could just convince them to, do developments that include some 3 bedrooms too, that would be awesome. You don't see, unless young people have good family supports in the community, you don't see many of the successful Berlin, people who've gone away, gone to school, are starting a family, land back in Berlin. They might land back in the area, though a lot of them don't. They don't even bother to come back to the area, but the housing just isn't here. So unless they have a family that can subsidize them in getting housing in Berlin, a young family with, $80,000-$90,000 a year income, but they're paying off school debt. They haven't been able to start saving up towards a house. They need affordable rental housing to live in to get on that track. They're not coming back. And I think that's tragic. And in addition to the lower income families that are here, and like I say, they're in inadequate housing and making do the best they can in it.
Any other questions for Doug? Okay, Doug, thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah.
Some
I
good
do want to just kind of commend Berlin a little bit, that 30 years ago, when they were just looking at how to do something with these housing laws, there were people who complained a lot about them, but they got to work. And, it hasn't been consistent planning because of the turnover of personnel over the years, but there's been consistent progress in that direction. I see a lot of communities where the people are just complaining about the law and that it's an impossible goal. And I look at, Berlin and Wethersfield, and there's a few other towns like us that are just right on the edge of crossing that 10% threshold. It doesn't mean you stop working on affordables, but it means you've got more control over the planning and can do it in a way that really fits the community in the best possible ways. And we're right there. Berlin's done an awesome job with that, so that's great to see.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, moving on, turn it over to Barbara Gilatti. Welcome, Barbara. You still with us?
Okay, hello.
Hi, Barbara.
So I am Barbara Gilatti from the Central Connecticut Health District. So I am the supervising sanitarian there over the Environmental Health Department. So in environmental health, we deal with inspecting and regulating facilities, which includes restaurants, food stores, hair and nail salons, public swimming pools, daycares, and motels and rooming units. So we handle all sorts of complaints involving housing, including property maintenance, tenant-landlord disputes, rodents, insects, garbage and refuse, unsanitary conditions, things like that. So as the local health department, we're not directly involved with affordable housing. However, we do get involved with housing issues in several ways, and we see a lot of housing situations all up and down the affordability spectrum. Specifically, the health district regulates motels and rooming houses in town, and we handle housing complaints, as I mentioned. The clientele we interface with include young up through the elderly, working adults, disabled adults, families with children, and permanent and transient residents. Most of the people we deal with are on limited incomes, either through employment or from disability payments or Social Security, or they're on state assistance programs like Section 8. So specifically for the motels and rooming houses, we currently regulate 14 motels in Berlin, all located on the Turnpike. These facilities include 2 chain motels, which are the Best Western and the Days Inn, with a total of 121 rooms. These rent mostly by the day or week, but we do have some long-term residents with long-term defined as greater than 30 consecutive days. The remaining 12 motels are small. They generally have 16 rooms or fewer. So these total 140 rooms. These are more likely to be rented by the week or by the month, although some do rent by the day or even by the hour. The range of costs for a room is between, say, $165 a week up to about $350 a week. So at the upper end, it can be fairly expensive, but that does include all utilities, including cable TV and internet, which is a big plus. We also have one rooming house in town on Farmington Avenue, which has, I think, 6 or 7 rooms. So much of the clientele lack resources to get an apartment based on bad credit or no credit. They don't have first and last month's rent. They can't get utilities turned on due to bad credit. So they need an option like these motels until they can get on their feet. So we see a complete mix of residents in these units. Many are single young people, but we also see seniors, single parents with children, multi-generational households. Some do have mental health or substance abuse issues. Some are disabled. Some have been recently incarcerated. Some are working in the area on a temporary basis. Some are on the Section 8 housing list and waiting to get a rent subsidized apartment, but some of them have simply fallen on hard times for a variety of reasons, and this is the housing they find themselves in right now. So there is a mix of transient and permanent residents in these units. Many do have access to a car or other transportation, but some are without. A lot of them do lack the ability to get to services such as grocery stores, laundry facilities, and medical care, which can be an issue. Some of these tenants have been here for years. For example, the longest term resident that I'm aware of was in one of these motels for 42 years in the same room, a 10 by 14 foot room. And he did pass away in that room. So many of them are there for years. So these rooms are typically small. A 12 by 14 foot room with an ensuite bathroom would be typical. Very few have kitchenettes. Some do have refrigerators, microwaves, and coffee makers, which we do allow. But a common problem that we see is that the tenants bring in additional cooking units such as hot plates and electric skillets. We do not allow these due to the potential fire hazard and common trip and electrical hazards from extension cords and overloaded outlets. Another common problem is that none of these offer guest laundry services. So we find people washing clothes in the bathtub and hanging the clothes around the room to dry. We do find a lot of clogged sinks in the bathroom, usually from washing dishes. And roaches are not uncommon due to the exposed food in the rooms. See, most of these, well, all of these facilities are older and have maintenance issues. And we find the lack of proper kitchen facilities is a big problem and does lead to a really unhealthy diet of packaged foods and fast foods, since they really don't have the opportunity to cook. And this is often a big problem when they have children and they just don't have the facilities they need. So the other aspect that we get involved with this is through housing complaints. So we do get quite a few housing complaints every year. Property maintenance issues are the most common complaint. This time of year, we get a lot of no heat or no hot water complaints, leaks, mold, appliances that don't work, mice that came in for the winter, that kind of thing. Complaints are mostly on rental units, including apartments, condos, and single and multifamily houses. We also come across a number of illegal apartments. These are usually in basements or attics. Illegal from a zoning sense that I don't think it's approved in that area, but these are definitely at the lower end of the rent spectrum. Many of them are illegal from our standpoint because they do not have proper means of egress. And most of them don't have kitchen facilities. So people put up with a lot of issues for the cheap rent. And rents in these are typically, say, 600 to 800 a month, but that does include their utilities. People also rent rooms in single-family homes where they share a kitchen and bathroom with other occupants. And those, again, are in this lower rent category. We do get involved with some of the over 55 communities, including some with income restricted units. Those tend to be newer units and we have fewer complaints on those. So I guess in summary.
Barbara, just a question, like when you were
Sure.
talking about like these illegal apartments, do you have
Yes,
a sense for numbers of those? Like, I know you mentioned how many of these motel rooms there were, roughly how many of these legal apartments, and typically between both motels and these illegal apartments, are they usually one or two people, or are there actually families in some of these things?
they're usually one or two people, but we do find families. For instance, in the motel rooms, a number of times we found families with 4 or 5 children. So you'll get 7 people living in a small motel room. And, usually they're just rolling out sleeping bags on the floors. So some of these get seriously overcrowded. The illegal apartments, I certainly have seen them with a few children, but mostly those are single adults. And I don't really know how many. Obviously, we don't know until we get a complaint, and that's when we find out where they are. They're usually in just a residential area, and you'd never know they were there, until we get a complaint. So I really don't know how many of those there are.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to say in general, the people that we deal with, some you might say they're not the type that you'd like to encourage to come into town anyway, but there are a number that are decent people that just need a leg up and a chance to get a good start. There are a number of them that are not going to be able to make the transition from a motel to an apartment, but there are certainly those that could. I would say that I think there's a big need for studio apartments and small 1-bedrooms, something for less than $1,000 a month, but something with a decent basic kitchen and some laundry facilities on a bus route would be great. But something clean and safe with adequate parking and with some green space would be really great, particularly for the families. But if you consider these people living in hotels where, as I say, they get maybe a 10 by 14 foot room, if you could get a studio apartment twice that size, it would be, look pretty darn good to these people. So I think there's a real market for the small size units. So any questions?
Do you have any questions for Barbara? Just
I do, I have a question. So the people living in the 1-room apartment or 1-room like motel rooms, have they attempted apartments and they're out of their price range, or in your general experience, how do they wind up there?
We've heard so many stories. They wind up there for many, many different reasons. There certainly are a number that are working folks that have an income. As I say, some of the upper end, price-wise units, you're looking at maybe $1,400 a month that they're paying right now for this room. But oftentimes the issue is they don't have first and last month's rent, and they can't get the utilities turned on because they don't have any credit or have bad credit. So by renting a room, as I say, it comes with all the utilities, including TV and internet. And that's why they are still in these units.
That's great. That's great feedback. Thank you very much. I just was thinking, if we create these, we want to make sure people are using them, right? So my thought process is just how do they end up in that situation and would this fix that? So,
Right. A lot of times, well, sometimes they're moving from outside the area and they take these as temporary housing and then find 5 years later, they're still there. Oftentimes it involves a divorce. You get single parents with some kids. Medical crises of various sorts will often do people in financially. A lot of different reasons.
okay, thank you.
Barbara, I guess I would ask the question to you and or Doug or both, relative to this issue of not having the first month's rent, the last month's rent, credit to turn on utilities. Are there any programs out there that are supporting these type of people? I mean, even if you make affordable housing available, you still got to overcome that problem. So it seems like there needs to be some state programs or whatever to help these people bridge that gap. Are there any?
Well,
I
right
can,
now,
I can
I don't-
address that. There are programs available that have vouchers for security deposits. Many landlords are reluctant to take them, but the major developers, Metro, Merit, will all honor those and accept those. So that can be a big boost, but you can generally get them. For Berlin, we would go through our Community Action Agency, which is New Opportunities of Greater Meriden. I don't know the volume of them that they have, but a lot of people will even turn that down when we suggest they go that route. And I don't know exactly all the reasoning behind that, but that is there. We have very limited funds. The Salvation Army gives us an allotment of about $3,000 a year. And then we get some donation money that's not restricted that we could put towards housing issues, but it doesn't go far. And so we try to use those primarily for someone that's in a unsafe or substandard housing, and they have a stable enough income source that if they can get into more suitable housing, they could sustain there, and it's that transition cost that they need help with. We could maybe pay a portion of the first month's rent to get them there, or help them with the physical moving costs, or do something like that. We'll only use that money if they're in a position where they can show us that they can sustain in the apartment, and we have to have a landlord that'll work with us. It can't be an under the table setup. They have to give us a W-9, and the payments they get would be reported to the IRS, and they get a 1099 for when they file their taxes and all of that. So if they can find a landlord that has something they can afford and is willing to work with us on those terms, we can provide some support each year until the available funds are exhausted.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions for either Doug or Barbara? Okay, hearing none.
Actually, I have just one quick question for Barbara. As far as the health complaints, I know that you mentioned the hotels and also rentals. What proportion of the complaints or issues that you have are hotels versus rentals? I'm just curious.
Things fluctuate, but I would say in terms of, we probably get more complaints on individual rentals than we do on the hotels. I don't know really what percentage. I'd say maybe 60 to 70% of the complaints come from individual rentals.
Okay, thank you.
It's a lot easier to deal with the motels. We have a little more leverage over them since we license them. So we can usually get repairs done. It's much more difficult with individual landlords.
All right. Well, thank you both for joining us. Gave us some good information. Really appreciate you taking the time tonight to meet with us. So, thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Jim, do you want to take a little time to add any other information you might think would be appropriate or helpful?
Sure. So I guess one of the things at the last meeting, George was asking about who's been involved in affordable housing in Berlin for a while, and I guess that's me. Obviously, a lot of other people, different planners along the way and stuff, but I have been involved for more than 20 years. So kind of forced me to look back at, what's been happening, over that period of time. So I thought it'd be helpful to put together like a little brief history of where we were and where we are now, to show kind of the movement and the trends toward creating more affordable housing in the town. And of course, Berlin initially was more of an agricultural community with some residential areas, Kensington Center, Berlin, and East Berlin. But most of the rest of the town, I looked back at some of the old plans, and not that long ago, but a lot of the town was zoned for agriculture. But, of course, things changed over time, less land in agriculture, post World War II era, lots of housing demand. So a lot of that land that was originally zoned for agriculture got rezoned for residential use and single family residential. You can still see the, the highest density zones like the R7s, R11s are in the traditional areas that were developed in those community centers. And the more rural, farm areas have been zoned. Most of them are zoned either R43 or R86, some mountain reserve. So Berlin started getting involved in affordable housing in the late 70s and early 80s. The Berlin Housing Authority was created. The first two projects that were developed were Marjorie Moore and Percival Heights in 1978 and 1982. And, I wanted to take a look at a little bit how, what were the siting criteria or planning criteria that might have gone into why these developments along the way are where they are. So the housing authority under our zoning, is the only entity that can really create multifamily housing and single family zones, and it's restricted to just senior housing in those single family residential zones. So both of those projects are in single family residential zones, but of course, both of them are also really connected to other town facilities. So Marjorie Moore, Town Hall, Library, et cetera, Percival Field. And, Percival Heights is the old Percival School. So we have the playing fields there, the senior center. So they're not like standalone facilities. They're part of a, larger, let's say, public complex. Then the next wave, I guess, of development was private sector, age restricted, affordable. I think there was a growing recognition late 90s, early 2000s. Demographic changes. There's going to be a demand for elderly housing. There's a need in the community. Developers were looking for sites that, the town was interested in having more housing developed. And so there were projects that were done, 3 projects really done in that period, say from 2002 to 2006 or so. Those were Orchard Ridge, Stonebridge, and Sage Pond Place. And all of those were, as we say, age restricted, affordable. They're, mixed income. I think we heard last time, each of those projects have some market rate units, but it's, they're 80 to 90% affordable. So they're primarily affordable with some market rate sprinkled in. And from a locational point of view, I'd say that, again, we're going to see Berlin Turnpike, and areas at margins of commercial and industrial zones, commercial, industrial, and residential areas were the areas that some of these housing developments were done. And also all these sites have all utilities available and good road access. So those are some of the characteristics that got involved, I think, in the siting of those facilities. And then the next wave, we talk about is these, for the first time, we have, the private sector affordable housing that's family, it's not age restricted. And, there's 3 projects there. One, we talked about Fieldstone Crossing, Stone Bridge by Metro. And the third, those are the major projects. The third project that came in later, it was Newport Center, 848 Farmington Avenue. I believe that was completed around 2014. And it has 16 units and 4 of them are deed restricted affordable. That was a little different in terms of financing that some of you may or may not remember, but the town, obviously that building was a problem for a long time. We called it the Tyvek building, and it was foreclosed. The town got involved and actually entered into a contract to buy the building. We looked for buyer developers. We, let's say, flipped the building to CIL, and they developed it for, again, a mixed use building with 16 units. And we were able to help them get some financing through actually with the assistance of CHFA, but it was Community Investment Act financing that helped bridge the gap. And that, is the reason that we have 4 affordable, deed restricted affordable units there. So we had the 3 projects. How are they different from the other ones? None of them are age restricted, and they're all family units. So that was the big departure. The next phase is really a set of projects that are most of these are going to be approved but not developed, right? So starting with the Knights of Columbus, 143 Percival Avenue. The Housing Authority has that approved for 50 units of senior affordable housing. They've struggled to get financing. I think Joe Wojorski mentioned last time, the town, has been an active partner. We optioned to sell them the site for $1. More recently, we've gotten a $200,000 grant to help to demolish the buildings. We've applied for other grants to help them with their financing, and working diligently on that. It's been a long-term proposition, but we certainly all hope that's going to come to pass. And again, as a housing authority project, it's in a single-family residential area. It's tied into this complex of Percival Field and Town Hall, et cetera. So it's a great location for additional housing. And then we've got these mixed income projects that were approved. The first being Deming Ridge, which is the 88 units. And since Ben talked to you last week, they got the final approval last Thursday, I believe, from CHFA. So that project is going to be moving forward, and they're looking to get some permits for site clearing and such and get started in the spring. So that's very exciting. And there's, as we discussed before, the 404 Berlin Turnpike project, which is the 200 units with 40 affordable, 20%, 40 affordable. They're still searching for financing. And we have 3 other applications that are either in the hopper or expected shortly. One that we talked about is 550 Berlin Turnpike, which is another 106 units, would be mixed income, again, similar to 404. Then we've got 1696 Berlin Turnpike, which would be the first, what we've got called infill development for conversion of these motels, some of the obsolete motels on the Berlin Turnpike to permanent residences. And I will say that the Planning and Zoning Commission was approached for this zoning amendment, and they did research. I also helped them do some research, and two of two of my contacts there were Doug and Barbara, and they told me a lot. They told me a lot about the conditions there. And one of the things that the Planning and Zoning Commission did is they required the 20% affordable provision that wasn't originally, originally requested by the developer. So we inserted those that provision, and so hopefully that's going to create some units of the type that we've heard that is really needed. But again, higher quality units with less issues. And we also have a project that's just coming in now at 309 Main Street, East Berlin. This is next to the other apartment in East Berlin on Main Street. And that project, again, is expected to be about 20 units. Again, it's all preliminary at this point. We're thinking it's going to be around 4 affordable units. So this will continue to contribute to the affordable housing stock. I think one of the main differences with these projects is, although they're mixed income, these are more 20 to 30% affordable and 70 to 80% market rate. So it's less affordable units in relation to the total development, but it is, I think it's beneficial and overall to have projects of various types. We do have a couple of projects that are like Stonebridge and River's Edge that are 100% affordable, but I think it's a better model to look for a mixed income. So this, now we're starting to have a variety of mixed income housing options. And so I would say we're also, as in the process of seeing a lot of potential market rate apartments, and that's something that hasn't happened in Berlin either. And we've seen, we've got projects approved that would more than double the apartments in Berlin if they're all constructed. And so that's an additional trend. And we've got, some of those projects is, Turnpike Ridge on the Turnpike, Kensington and Steel Center in Kensington Village. And both of those are going to be mixed use projects with market rate units. So I think a lot has changed in Berlin's housing market in terms of providing affordable units. As we've heard, we still have a ways to go, but some good things have happened. We've got a lot in the pipeline, and really, the planning and zoning, we talked at other meetings about some of the changes in zoning policy and then the maps that have created opportunities for us, affordable housing. We've got a lot of projects in the pipeline. I think one of the things that we have to kind of maintain a vigilance about is that it's most important that these projects that are already approved get built. That's step one, right? And so hopefully, the town has done additional things in terms of making tax abatements available for some of these, mixed use projects where previously we didn't have tax abatements available for any of the affordable projects we talked about. And even Metro's new project doesn't qualify for a tax abatement, but some of these mixed use projects, we do have a new policy that provides tax abatements for those. Hopefully that's going to help them move forward. As we've talked about, obviously with the projects that are in the pipeline, we're going to go well past the 10% goal, which is exciting. But right now we're 62 units short. We're going to move further away from the goal when the 2020 census numbers come in. We expect it's going to be another 50 units or so. Maybe we had about 500 units that were built since between censuses. And so we're going to be about 100 units, 110, 120 units away from the goal. We also, as we discussed last time, we realized that, we have a lot of deed restricted affordable units, which is great because that's a constant, but there's also the CHFA mortgage units and the Section 8 voucher units and such, which can vary from year to year. So, certainly it wouldn't be wise for Berlin in any event to be looking for, oh, we made 10%, we got one unit over, we're good. We need to have a target that's above 10%, and we also have to try to meet the needs that we've been discussing. So I just would throw out a few thoughts. And we've heard things from different people about where do we go next, and as we get more public input and hear the results of the survey, and get ideas, work with Planning and Zoning Commission, we'll get more. But I think I just wanted to list a few of the ideas that I've heard so far, and some of those are more affordable housing for seniors. I think we'll talk a little bit, I think, about the survey, but that's something certainly that we're seeing already in the preliminary results of the survey. We heard about the fact that we have a lot of owner-occupied units that are sold that meet CHFA guidelines, but that are not bought by people who fall into those income categories. So hopefully, again, maybe some programs will be created to help those people that are below 100% of median, that are not being able to compete for those units, be more successful in the future, like some of those vouchers they talked about on rents and such. But failing that, there's not an immediate solution. But there are models in other places of purpose-built housing for that has that is occupied and affordable and would be deed restricted. Those are some funding sources and nonprofits and such, smaller scale projects that are they're more difficult. It's not going to be Metro, it's not going to be Merit, it's got to be the housing authority, assistance from the town, nonprofits and such. But that's an area that we can look at. Another area is I think we significantly increased the allowed density in the area of the train station for the Steel Center project. Now we have, like, from a zoning perspective, and that we have a village district overlay, we have different areas within that. So the core area 1, which is around the train station, has a maximum density of 26 units, and that's where the Steel Center project is. Whereas across the street is core area 2, it might be 4 to 6 units per acre. So it's quite a difference. And so we might look at increasing the density in the core area 2, as we initially we had a lower density in core area 1, we bumped it up as we had development proposals and we were able to evaluate those. That might be something to look at. We recognize that the town owns the trailer park. Certainly those are affordable units, but they're not deed restricted affordable. So again, it's not guaranteed that it's going to be affordable. So looking at ways to make those deed restricted. We think most of the people that are there would probably qualify, but how do you do that? Long-term proposition, but maybe. Another item that has come up in some of our POCD plan of conservation and development discussions is we realized that the town, in some of our more dense single-family zones, we used to have 2 families, and especially 2 families permitted as were permitted uses, and they were eliminated as permitted uses in a few zones. And we have some existing non-conforming 2 families, and maybe that's again an area on the margin where we might look at whether we want to reconsider that policy. The state is requiring the town to look at accessory dwelling units, and there's an opt-in, opt-out clause in the state legislation. I think probably Berlin's going to opt out, but right now in terms of following the strict state guideline, but hopefully we can make some adjustments. Right now, our accessory units are limited, I think, primarily to elderly family members and such, where maybe we can expand the types of people that might be able to live in accessory dwelling units, different extended family, different categories that would need that kind of assistance. We also had we had discussions a little bit about historic issues in town. One of the things that came up was in Worthington Ridge area. There are some larger buildings that maybe, the old town hall or other, outbuildings where if they could be allowed to do, smaller multifamily, maybe that would help preserve the historic character of some of these buildings that are challenged. So that's an idea that's out there. And another one is that was talked about in the last plan of conservation and development also, but we have in a few of the zones, we've talked about like the Berlin Turnpike development zone where you have a requirement for a percentage of the units being affordable. Whereas in a lot of other zones and situations, there's no affordable requirement at all. So should we be looking at a broader range of developments and inserting an affordable component into that? And obviously, we have to consider market conditions and the like as well. But we have one way to make sure that once you meet the 10% that you stay there is if you have if you had an affordable requirement in every development, then you're going to be able to keep up. And when you have a lot of development that happens that doesn't have any affordable requirement, then you're always going to have to chase it with other projects. So those are just a few thoughts. Be happy to, answer any questions or talk about these things.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions for Jim? Jim will be with us as we go on anyway, so that was a good summary, Jim. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. Moving on then, close out this section. We have a section here for public comment. Do we have any public comments out there? I know, Sue, you're out there. Do you like to chime in on anything, or we only have one person? Okay, nobody's here. So we'll move on to item 5. No, we already did that. We reviewed the minutes. So section 6, status update on the housing plan survey. Either Jennifer or Jim.
I am going to share my screen. Does everybody see it at this point? Okay, so this is just the raw data on the survey. You have received 753 responses through SurveyMonkey, and then an additional 10 paper copy responses. I have not looked through the paper copy responses at this point, but I did take a look at this data. I do want to share some of the slides with you. I think it's important to know as you're looking at the slides that not everybody responded to every question. So when you look at the slides, the number that you're seeing over to the far right is indicating the number of people that responded to particular questions. So, but I'm going to start with slide number 6, just to give you a sense of the folks who responded. So the majority of people live in Berlin and Kensington areas of town, and you had only 3.13% of outside of Berlin participants. Moving on to slide number 8, in terms of how long folks have lived in Berlin, the respondents have lived in Berlin. The vast majority of them have resided in Berlin for more than 20 years. Again, approximately 48.77%. I'm sorry, can everybody hear me? Is everybody okay? Because I hear some rumblings. I just want to make sure.
Okay, Jennifer.
Okay. Does your household rent or own the home you live in? Very high percentage of folks own the home they live in at 93.58%. What housing type? Vast majority reside in single family detached house at 90.31%. Have you ever lived outside of Berlin? Again, almost 90% have resided outside, and that includes an exception for schooling for college. How many people, including yourself, live in your home? The majority were either 2 family or 5 or more, or 4 family units. So just with regard to that, if you share a household with others, how does the household function? The majority, almost 80%, functions as a family. Other than your current housing type, you may recall this question, what other housing type do you feel could meet your housing needs today? The vast majority responded either a single family detached or single family attached townhouse style housing. And then we get to the next home questions. In terms of your next home, do you think it will be larger or smaller? The highest percentage here is smaller at 40.86%, but you also have 35.43% who are unsure of what they would prefer. Do you think you will want to own or rent your next home? 81.03% would want to own. What housing type would you consider for your next home? Again, single family detached and single family attached townhouse type were the preferences. And then when do you think you will move into your next home? We only had approximately 20% within the life of this plan that's being drafted. So within the next 5 years. Beyond that, approximately another 20% between 5 to 10 years, 32.77% more than 10 years. And then there was a large percentage, about a third, that was unsure. Do you believe that you'll remain in Berlin? So it was a small percentage said no, about 20%, yes, 35.53%, and then about half was unsure. Let me just scroll up a bit so that you get, oh, sorry, this full question. So this question was the question that asked, the question's kind of cut off. It was the question that asked whether you know someone or somebody lives with you who's 18 years or older, or 55 years or older, or anybody else that you know who you anticipate will be looking for a new home in Berlin in the next 5 years, again, for the life of the plan. 31.12% said that they do know someone. And then in terms of the housing type that they thought the relative, again, 18 years or older adult child, or 55 years or older relative, or again, that other category of somebody else that you know. The largest response was for single family owned at 49.55%. They believe that that would be that person's preference. Now we get into start to kind of get into the opinion questions, if you will. Do you think that there is enough housing in Berlin right now to meet the town's future needs? 42% responded no, approximately 42% yes, 32% no, and then 25% unsure. Are you concerned about the cost of housing or home ownership in Berlin? Approximately 55% said yes, 40% no, and then only 6% was unsure. Do you think that Berlin, this was sort of an interesting one, do you think that Berlin might benefit from offering more housing choices and options, including more housing which is affordable? And it was a 50-50 split. But then as we move on, you'll see, I'm going to go to this one next, and then we'll go back up to impacts. As we move on and we ask which types of ownership or rental housing units do you think that Berlin needs, these were the numbers. So in terms of affordable, what was pointed out, you'll see the highest percentages there are for affordable ownership units, specifically affordable age-restricted rental units and ownership units, age-restricted ownership units for seniors at 64.55% and 63.61% respectively. And then also assisted units for seniors, assisted living, nursing homes and the like at 60.59%. Going back up to 42, how do you think offering, and this is one of the impact questions, how do you think offering more housing choices options, including more housing which is affordable, would impact the community? Positive, negative, no impact, unsure. So generally, there were positive responses, positive impact responses for customer pool for businesses, employee pool for businesses, new families in town, and a more negative response to impacts on town services, impact on traffic at negative response at 65.22%. Tax base, positive, negative, unsure, all about equal there. As far as diversity, very positive at 53.51%. Education, a little more negative than positive, negative being 43.24% and 30.78% for positive. And local civic organizations, by and large, positive, but some people were somewhat unsure about that. And then with regard to real estate values, we see most people believing that offering more housing choices and options would have a negative impact at 46.40%. These are all the other two questions with regard to rental versus ownership. Again, impacts, do you believe, what type of impact do you believe the increase in rental housing units would have on the community? Most people are indicating that there would be a negative impact from 40.13%. And then you look at the numbers for ownership housing units, you're seeing most people believing those who chose between positive and negative, most people chose positive at 36.42%. With the rental, there was 33.12 that was unsure whether there would be an impact, and with ownership, there was a 36.92% that were unsure whether there would be an impact.
So Jennifer, this is going to be analyzed by the consultants, right?
Yes, and that's going to come up at your next meeting. We anticipate the joint meeting that you're going to have with the POCD committee. We anticipate that the consultant will have that data analysis for you at that point so that they could talk to your committee as well as the representatives of the Planning and Zoning Commission that are serving on that committee. And then just in terms of, again, housing type, this is slide number 50. This is question 24. Please state whether you believe Berlin needs more of the specific housing types listed. There is definitely across the questions, one of the trends is clearly, again, the belief that there's a need for more single family detached and single family attached townhouse type principally. And you could see the sort of the trend in terms of as the larger housing types or multifamily housing types increase, the more negative response. And then there's a negative response to mobile home as well. In terms of demographics, just to run through that very quickly, most respondents are between the ages of 40 to 59 years old. As far as the percentage of gross income, there was a large percentage of folks who didn't respond to that. I'm sorry. There we go. Yeah, there was a percentage, 20.24% preferred not to answer. The largest percentage you have there is earning between 100,000 and 150 per year at 22.30%. With regard to how much folks are spending on housing, you have the greatest amounts. There was, of course, prefer not to answer again at 23.93%, but of those that did respond, they're spending between 20 and 40%. And that's pretty much it. But we'll get the data out to you. I will say this, I didn't get a chance. The responses, the written in responses and comments were very lengthy. I think that the committee would certainly like to see that information. And there were some very, very thoughtful responses. So, we'll pass those along to you and we'll review them as well. And we'll talk about that at your next meeting as well. In terms of, I think we could just go right into the existing conditions. Just this. To scroll up. Well, in terms of the existing conditions, we did send you out a draft. I'm not quite sure why I'm unable to scroll up in it, why it's giving me a hard time. But I think what's most critical, and Jim, please do jump in. Obviously, the beginning of the baseline conditions, the existing conditions. So this is your first look at a portion of the draft affordable housing plan being prepared by your consultant. The beginning of it, the first, 17 or 18 pages has demographics that we've reviewed in prior meetings with you. And then probably around page 18, it starts to talk about the housing affordability gap. And that's a very important section that, of course, that you need to look at, because that's what we need to be focused upon. So I would just, guide you in that way in terms of, read it, reread it. Please jot down any questions that you have. We do want the meeting with the consultant and again with the POCD to committee to be as productive as it possibly can be in terms of talking about the way that the issue is framed in that area of the plan, and how we're going to proceed in terms of identifying goals and strategies, and start to talk about those portions of the plan as well. Jim, do you want to make any comments about the baseline conditions?
Just a couple things about in general. One is if you have specific questions or ideas that you email to us in advance, and we can ask the consultant to look at specific issues. I would say that some of the changes that we've asked the consultant to make or had the dialogue back and forth on concerned making sure that we had benchmarks, so that if you have a number or a percentage, we know that affordability is a general issue, so we want to know how Berlin fits into the region, not just how Berlin is by itself. That gives us a context to judge. Also, some of the information, was kind of you can present it as, let's say things that are causal versus things that are correlated. And I think, we're trying to parse that out a little bit so that they can, if things are correlated, but doesn't mean that it's caused by, again, specific condition in Berlin, for example, or any other town. But it's maybe correlated with certain other variables. So those are some of the things that we're just trying to sort out. Obviously the big picture, housing affordability is an issue in Berlin and the state of Connecticut and the region. And that's why we're here.
I just had a general question about it. 'Cause I did spend some time with it today. So I guess trying to understand, is this like chapter 1 of the plan in your view? Or I guess that's my question. Because here's my concern. This is a lot of good information, but it's very detailed, wordy. This is not going to get read if you put this, like if this is chapter 1 of the plan. I mean, to me, this is a really good appendix. And then to boil this all up into 4 or 5 pages of a summary, with this as a supporting documentation. So if this was intended to be the chapter 1, we're going to end up with a 200-page document. Nobody's going to read this thing. I don't know what we're trying to do here. I thought, this is supposed to be a plan that gets put on file with the town clerk, that gets used by the various departments, get read by, as a roadmap for citizens, developers, and so forth. So I guess that's my question. Where are we going with this, or where does it fit in?
So I can comment on that, George. I've seen it both ways. I've seen some plans that have been adopted that incorporate the demographics in to the plan itself, and then I've also seen the demographics attached as appendices. So I think that that's something that is open for discussion in terms of the way that we lay it out. Certainly, and that is something that Jim and I can relay that concern to the consultant on behalf of the committee.
Yeah, and it's typical, like if you look at plan of conservation and development, for example, or, we did the TOD plan, transit oriented development area plan with Civic Moxie, and it's typical for, for the real detailed information to go into the appendix, but, we want to have enough in the body to kind of frame the issues. So that's try to achieve that good balance.
I just think that being that it's baseline information, it's important to know where we're getting the information. But what's important to me out of these things are, what are the key points or salient points coming out of this? What are the things that come out of this that are driving why we're doing what we're doing, and to bring them up and surface them and summarize them and point back to the very detail. I'm just concerned, again, that if I come to this and I start reading 25 pages, I'm going to get like halfway through it. I'm going to put it down, to be honest with you. It's a lot of good information, but it's a lot of information. I'll also make another comment, whether it's in the appendices or not. A lot of the graphs are very difficult to read because they're small, difficult to see, especially some of the land map graphs, whatever. Maybe not graph, charts. I would just ask them to go back and look at some of the charts and see if they might be better off being put in tables versus pictorially, because especially some of them with the colors, you start to bleed into one another, and it's really an eye test for me in some instances, because there's just a lot of information in here. And then there's a few instances, and I can point them out later specifically, where some of the charts didn't even make any sense to me when I tried to look at it and figure out what it was trying to tell me. I didn't understand them. We don't have to take up time to do that. I can make some notations on all this stuff and send it to you and Jennifer, just what my concerns are. But I would look at it from a readability perspective with all the charts and graphs and stuff. Some of them are pretty tough.
Yeah, one of the things that I know we've talked about in the context of the POCD already is the maps. And we're going to have, if these are going to be electronic documents, there's going to be the opportunity to make these maps in a way that they can be enlarged. Let's say you can zoom in and drill down to the specific data. And as I think you can see, we've tried to develop a lot of very Berlin specific data and information that I think is important for anybody to understand the context of what we're doing. And, especially all these projects that are already in place and being developed, and where are they and what are they and all those things. So the maps, hopefully, we'll look toward having them be interactive in the digital, in the digital world.
And whether it's digital and basically it's just going to be text, you're still going to bring up to a screen unless you're really going to make it interactive. But even on some of the charts, I mean, the difference between, if it is going into an appendix, I have no issue whatsoever if the appendix goes from 25 pages to 40 pages, because we make the graphics a lot bigger so you can see them and understand them. That would be my take. If they're being crammed in here the way they are, just to condense it, so we being judicious with space, I would expand them out, make them readable.
Yeah, and we're gonna, the consultants are used to putting together these reports, so they'll have experience in other places. So I'm sure when we pass on the comments that they'll be able to.
This is a trivial thing, minor thing, but just it was sent out as a Word document, and I know from experience, like if whoever produced it, if they're at a certain version of Word with certain parameters or whatever, when I get it and open it up in Word, it doesn't format correctly. So it's nice to get the Word document, but it'd probably be also good to get a PDF of it too, that you see it, because they probably have it all formatted nicely and whatever. I had a lot of graphs that ran into one another and stuff like that. That when I printed it out or I saw it on my screen, because I have an older version of Word, it didn't come out right. So it became a little bit tough to read.
I'm sure we can do that,
Yeah,
provide PDF.
That's a
I'll
minor
send you
thing.
another, I'll send you another version of, that's not a problem. I have Adobe Professional and.
But again, my
obviously
bigger
create the PDF. Yeah.
At this stage, and we can talk about it, I would rather see all this summarized up to like 4 to 6 pages, very succinct, clearly understand what's driving the recommendations we're making in our plan based on the baseline, and then added input from other constituents too that we've been doing the last couple of meetings.
Yeah, I would say just that, as far as, the Word document, interacting with the consultant and staff, we typically, again, go in and track changes, makes it easier for everybody to communicate really specific comments. So you're welcome to do that with us. Give us very specific comments or recommendations if you like. But I understand from a formatting and, general readability point of view that the PDF is going to be a lot better.
That's all I had on it. Anybody else? Everybody read through it?
I have not read it yet.
We're going to give a test at the next meeting. So
Yeah. Looking forward to it, but I have not read it.
I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in here. I also think a little bit of it was a little bit redundant too, making the same points a few times over, saying the same things. And here's a section and that's repeated in another section that might be relevant. I don't know.
yeah, some of this stuff is like, again, all the towns are doing it, and the consultants are, kind of having, a certain formats and information that they're using, that you're going to find a lot of commonality among all the plans. How important, some of that stuff is, I'm not so sure, but, we'll try to weed through that.
Yeah, I guess that's one of my references, you, at the beginning of this, there was a binder that was handed out with the guidelines that came out of the state and whatever, and in it, they actually referenced, the town of Salisbury's affordable housing plan. They had an affordable housing committee that was in existence since 2010. And when the law got passed in 2017, I mean, they jumped all over it. And they actually published their plan in 2018, and it was available. And I actually got the copy of it, and I circulated it to the people here. But I mean, their whole plan, 16 pages.
Yes.
It's very high level, very, very easily read, whatever. I'm sure it would benefit a great deal from an appendices with the details and things like that. But, somebody can pick this up and go through it in 20 minutes and get a very good sense for what they want to do. They don't really want to do a lot, but you can get a very good sense for what they want to do. I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from. It would be nice to do that with the detail. If I need to drill down a specific section that is there, but get me through it quickly. But that's my viewpoint, so. Okay, anything else on? So we'll just.
I think just on the agenda, the next meeting,
Yeah, we
upcoming outreach community session.
kind of skipped one
Skipped,
item.
yeah.
Skipped item 7. Status update on the upcoming community outreach sessions. We have another meeting scheduled on the 23rd. You have any thoughts on that, Jennifer? I know we talked about churches. And
Yes.
Yeah.
you also have the senior center meeting coming up, I think, on the 10th.
Yes, on the 10th at 1 p.m. That's been posted at this point. I'll send you the flyer for that. That is going to be both in person and remote. So if anybody wants to participate in that remotely, that's fine. But I do want to just update you with regard to your next meeting on the 23rd. You'll recall from your last meeting that Jim had advised that the POCD committee was meeting on the 24th. They did meet last night, and they do want to keep their meeting on the 24th. So again, we do believe that it is necessary that you have a joint meeting with that committee, and both committees together hear from the consultant at the same time. So the question becomes, how many of you can make it on the 24th? And whether or not, I'm assuming you don't want to do 2 meetings back to back. That Amy is shaking her head no. Yeah. So, I think we have the meeting on the 24th, and then maybe what we do is use the March 2nd date to do our next outreach session.
Our people are available on the 24th. I'm okay, but
I'm available. Anyone else?
yes.
We got a thumbs up. Tracy, one of the Tracy's up there.
I think Tracy Shipman's indicating she's okay. Amy, are you okay? Tracy Sisty's thumbs up. Yep.
I may have a conflict with Board of Trustees that I'm on, but even if it's just me missing, you'll still have a quorum. So it sounds like anyway, you'll still have a quorum.
Just an FYI, on March 2nd, there is a Board of Ed and Board of Finance meeting the same time.
Okay.
So just let you know, a couple of us won't be for the March 2nd.
We were concerned about that. I know it was discussed when we talked about March 2nd back a few meetings ago. So do we need to reschedule that March meeting then? Do we want to try to do another day that week? Let's just take a look at the calendar. Let's see what else is going on that week.
All right.
We also need to take into account room availability.
Okay, so I,
Jennifer, why don't you
I'm
send
sorry?
out something to everybody and just see what availability is and working with Kate, we'll see what we can get for a day.
Okay.
I-
Yeah,
I'm gonna, as I mentioned, when I started all this, I'm gonna have troubles with all Wednesdays in March because they're very heavily
Because of
sort of finance.
the budget,
oriented.
yeah.
Some of that's BOE too. Multiple conferences on Wednesdays, but again, we talked about me not necessarily being here. Robert's people.
Yeah, there
Okay,
there
so is
are
that,
obviously a
you
lot of
work with,
meetings.
send something out, Jennifer, and coordinate
Yes.
that? I do have a question. This is a procedural question. Where we talked that senior center meeting, that senior center presentation, and you have Zoom or whatever. What happens if 4 of us showed up? That constitutes potentially a meeting that has to be noticed and properly. So we
Yeah.
can't just have everybody show up. right?
Yes, yeah, you know,
Jennifer, what
I-
is this meeting on the 10th? Is it,
it's just a presentation for the seniors to, you know, help them to understand what the process is, what is going into the affordable housing plan, for them to ask any questions that they have, to make any comments about housing, senior housing that they'd like to make. And that's
I know I'm not
essentially-
available that day and I volunteer not to go.
Is that
Me
Rob?
too. 1 o'clock in the middle of the day is not great for me either.
I have to be there because I live there.
Chris, I'm assuming you're working, right?
Yeah, I'll be a meeting, I think it's a monthly. I think, something like
This is during the day, so.
that. I can't do 24th at client meeting as well.
Jennifer, who's
Yeah.
hosting this meeting on the 10th? Is it going to be
In
you and Jim?
in terms of the presenters, it's going to be Maureen and I. And I, to be honest with you, I don't really, George, I don't really have any concern because no committee business is going to be done at the meeting. I do think it's fine. But I was anticipating that you wouldn't have 4 there anyway, because of the time of day. So,
Okay, I'm just double checking.
In the actual meeting, I was just considering it was someone who's gonna give us a presentation.
You just get into these complexities that there's 4 of us together and we say the words affordable housing, it's a meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee. It's ad hoc and then it's not properly noticed and you can get in trouble. That's why I bring it up. Am I correct, Kate, or
You are correct.
I'm just trying to
Very thorough.
not get Kate in
Appreciate you
trouble,
looking out for us, George.
not get me in trouble. All right, any other things to discuss on any of these last couple of topics? Good. Motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
second,
Second.
in discussion. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned. Good evening. Thank you for coming.
thank you.
Thanks.